Right, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Very good. So your little boy's 4 years old now.
I know, can you believe it? Can you believe where the time
That's
goes?
amazing.
I know, it's absolutely mad.
So we're all 4 years older.
I know. Ooh. And wiser, hopefully.
Well, I'm not sure about that.
But it is your wisdom that I want uh, to pick out in this interview because you have been an art dealer for some decades now,
I'm afraid so.
since the 80s, I think.
Something like that.
So you've seen trends come and go. You've seen artists rise in value and fall in value. So I can think of no one better to ask about how you invest wisely in art. So that's a very big question, and I think we need to break it down. So where do you suggest people start if they are thinking about investing wisely in art?
Okay. I think the biggest mistake that people often make is they think that all art is a good investment. And that's deeply and profoundly wrong. Most art is going to shoot down in value and never be worth even a fraction of what was paid for it forever afterwards. So you have to consider, if you're buying it for aesthetic reasons, that's fine. You buy a new sofa, you know that's not going to go up in value. You buy a new car, that's not going to go up in value. You buy a bunch of flowers, it's not going to go up in value. You're quite happy. If, on the other hand, you're buying something and making a substantial cash investment, maybe you want to make sure it is likely to go up in value. I always say to my clients, buy something because you like it and not because it's a good investment. And I think that's a good mantra.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, I can't say what will go up in value and what won't go up in value. If I could, I'd be a billionaire, but I can't. So I can only give an expression of opinion. But what I will say to you is this: if you've got an eye for an investment, there are certain do's and don'ts which you should be considering.
Okay, what are those do's and don'ts?
Okay, well, the first thing you do is you look for something in good condition. You look for something with unfaded colours. You look for something which is nicely signed, which has a good provenance, and which is definitely authentic.
What do you mean by provenance for those of us who aren't versed in that term?
Well, it's quite a good idea to know where your art actually comes from.
Right.
So if it comes from a good collection or from a museum, or if it's been exhibited in a famous gallery, that's all quite useful. Not essential, but quite useful.
So people should look for the history of where that piece of artwork has been, any certificates of authenticity, any documents that have followed it around from gallery to collection to museum.
Yes, indeed.
Right.
Secondly, if you're buying the sort of works which we deal in, you very often have to have an expert certificate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what is an expert certificate? It's quite a complicated question, but what normally happens if you have a famous artist, some well-known academic or dealer or whatever has written a major volume or corpus or catalogue raisonné of the work.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, you'll look in a catalogue raisonné and you'll check that the information is corresponding as far as it should do. You'll check the colours are right, the signatures are right, the size is right, the paper's right, the watermark's right. All these things are part of standard due diligence. Then is the question of certification. Generally, if you're buying graphic works, it doesn't need an expert certificate because it's all described in the catalogue raisonné.
And by graphic works, do you mean works on paper and prints?
No, I mean just prints.
Just prints.
So if you're buying a work on paper, which is basically a drawing or some such similar, very probably by a famous artist, you're going to need a certificate from an expert.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the industry actually decides which certificate is acceptable and which isn't acceptable. And it's not necessarily a straightforward thing. For example, if you're buying Salvador Dali, it's sort of okay, perhaps, if you've got a foundation Dali, because a lot of people have got questions about the Dali Foundation. But if you've got a Nicolas Duchamp certificate, it's definitely okay.
Right.
So it's not a straightforward thing. If you're buying Picasso, it's probably okay if you have a Maya Picasso certificate.
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly okay if you have a Claude certificate.
Right.
You have got to do the proper research to find out who is the requisite expert who's going to do the job.
Right.
If you haven't got one, it's dangerous because you may not get one. And various academic foundations do dreadful things about which you don't want to go. For example, if you apply for an add-on certificate for a Miro drawing and they decide that the thing is a fake, they burn it. You don't get it back again. So if you've spent £18,000 buying it and then it gets burnt, you have a bit of a problem to get it back, get your money back from the guy who sold it to you. So there are certain pitfalls. Also, you can wait many months before you get the certificate back because these so-called experts really don't prioritize you or me. They really didn't care. So they can make you wait and wait and wait and wait and wait. So there are a lot of problems in self-certification. But when all's said and done, you can sometimes get a bargain if from your own expertise and experience and provenance, you buy something and you pay a smaller price for it and then you certify. It is a gamble.
So it seems like it's a lot of a big investment in time if you want to invest yourself because of all of the research, which I suppose is one of the benefits of having a good art dealer to hand, because the art dealer will have done a lot of the research on these pieces for you. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, for example, at the moment, we've got 5 drawings by Juan Miro in our inventory, all of which have got add-on certificates. We wouldn't even consider offering it for sale without the proper certification. We will have done any art dealer has to go through due diligence when he acquires something to convince first himself or herself that the piece is what it's supposed to be. And only then can it be offered to the general public.
Perfect. So are there any other do's and don'ts that people need to consider when they're investing in art?
Well, what we've dwelt on is very important, buying from a reputable source. If you buy something on eBay thinking that you're getting yourself a nice Picasso drawing for $40, you probably aren't. There's always going to be something wrong with it. If, on the other hand, you buy from a reputable dealer, you're probably going to be okay when all's said and done. Similarly, if you buy from auctions, there are good auctions and there are bad auctions. You have to be a bit careful. Sometimes you can buy fakes at auctions and then you've had considerable problems getting your money back. We've nearly lost a lot of money from buying things sight unseen as per description.
So then in that case, it's a little bit like buying a house at auction. You should always go and see it to make sure that you can authenticate it yourself with your own eyes, not just buy it on a wing on a prayer, hoping that it's okay.
We ourselves buy a lot of things sight unseen, and we have them shipped to us. I guess we know a thing or two about what can go wrong. And we generally do things like paying with a credit card so that we can bounce it back if it's fake or not as per described. And we have a good body of reference books. We can take a lot of safeguards and we know a thing or two about how these things work. The average buyer, however, possibly not experienced with our expertise and knowledge of how to do these things can come badly unstuck, especially if they're paying a lot of money and perhaps buying it from someone not as scrupulous as they might be.
What does a bad auction look like? If someone needs to look out for the warning signs that something might not be quite as it should be, what would those be?
Well, when I say a bad auction, I don't mean necessarily a bunch of villains, but perhaps an auction house which is not used to dealing with such things and which has got one or two such things about which they know little. For example, we ourselves bought what we do. It's no great secret. We buy a lot of things from small American auction houses. And these guys don't know much about them. They don't describe them particularly well, and they don't know what they're doing. We do. So when we spot something, we ask a whole lot of very difficult questions. We convince ourselves, and only then do we bid. But if you don't know what we know, you're in trouble in a situation like that.
So how do you feel about online auctions through places such as Artsy, and there was Paddle 8, I'm not sure if that's still around, and there's what was the Antiques Trade Gazette, which is now there are various online platforms for art auctions.
Sure. Most of these are quite reputable. You know, the ones you mentioned are all pretty reputable. They've all got good experts behind them, good experience. So you can generally buy from people like that with reasonably good confidence. Things can go wrong, of course, even in the big auction houses. I bought things from some of the big three in the past, which I've had to take back because they were fakes. But, you know, stuff like that can happen to anyone.
Yes.
That's how it works.
So do you think if someone's starting out investing in art that they need to set themselves a specific budget? Should a budget be flexible? Where do you think people should start at the very beginning level?
I think the problem a lot of people have got is they think to themselves, I'll start off cheap and then I'll gain some experience and then I'll start buying more expensive and better things. The problem you've always got is when you embark on a collection, because you don't have experience and expertise, you'll make mistakes. You'll buy the wrong thing, you'll pay too much for it, or indeed you won't know what you want because you haven't seen it. Whereas the experienced collector or dealer or whatever has been doing it for a while, gets to know what is quality, what is good, what is bad, and then invest in it. I would always say to somebody who's buying art, you should try to get a good dealer to hold your hand and talk with, and you should try and get the benefit of their advice. And you're much better off buying one or two really nice things than a whole lot of things of indifferent size and quality. I made the same mistake myself. My hobby outside my art dealing is I buy coins. And my interest is in English crowns. So when I first started collecting, I only bought very fine ones. Looking back now, bad mistake. I should have bought extremely fine ones, paid 3 times as much, bought 1/3 of the quantity, but enjoyed earning them more.
I see.
This you only learn from experience.
Of course. Everyone starts somewhere. And of course, when you're learning something new, you will always make mistakes. But what do you think what are the standard things people should do at the very beginning? Are there things that like focusing on one artist or focusing on one series from an artist? Or are there any general rules or guidelines that people should follow, do you think?
First of all, I think you need to consider what you're buying and why you're buying it. If you also want to have an end game. How far and how deep do you think you might be going? You know, Might you want one good piece? Might you want something to give your grandchildren? You know, you've got 3 grandchildren, so you want to buy 3 pieces. Or might you want to embark on a policy of actually collecting?
Mhm.
Then you want to try and establish parameters. Like, for example, you might start getting ideas about where they're going to go, what's going to happen to them, and so on and so forth. Then you need to go through a process of research and self-education. For example, you might buy catalogue raisonnés or books, or reading round the subject to get some idea of what you like, what's available, and what it's going to cost you.
Mhm.
Once you've done that, then and only then should you actually be embarking on the search. If you start buying things ad lib without having thought about it, it's a bit like going from here, from London to Edinburgh without a roadmap. You need a roadmap. You need some idea where you're going and how you're going to get there.
Yep. Now, I have bought a couple of things from you in the past, and I was very shocked about how reasonable and affordable things are on the secondary market for big names like Picasso and Miro and Chagall. Is there a reason that those pieces are less affordable, and does that affect their quality when they're sold on in the future?
You have to remember that some of these guys may have been very famous, but they were very prolific. I mean, take someone like Picasso. He made tens of thousands of works of art in his lifetime. I think there were about 2,000 different prints he made, all
Wow.
in limited editions. He made about 1,500 different sorts of ceramics, all in limited editions.
Mm-hmm.
So although Picasso is quite expensive as an artist to collect, you can't say they're rare. They're actually rather common.
I
There's
see.
a lot of them around. So at the end of the day, you might find that you'll pay £3,000-4,000 for a bottom of the range Picasso, but you will actually find one for that sort of price.
Mm.
If you want to think that that's a good investment, you're probably wrong, because probably you need to spend a little bit more and buy something a little bit better. When my first Picasso, which I remember buying 25, 30 years ago, I was over the moon. I thought it was wonderful. In fact, it was terrible. It was a very bad buy, and it was not at all nice. It had the merit of being cheap, but that was about the only good thing about it.
What did you do with that piece? Have you kept it, or have you managed to sell it on?
Like everything, it's been sold 30 years ago.
How do you know? Is there any way to know if an artwork will increase in value?
No.
There are some websites and platforms out there, like Mutual Art, who track the value of artists at auctions. Do you ever use those yourself?
Yes, I do. And I'm always in mind of how things work.
Mm-hmm.
The way things work, basically, if you're looking at investment, investment is normally based on past performance. So if you look at any form of investment, be it real estate or equities or fine wines or old cars, what you're looking at is what they've done in the past few years. And most people then make an investment based on past performance.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as we all know, past performance is absolutely no guarantee, but it's a better guarantee, or it's a better likelihood than something which has no past performance.
Yes.
Similarly, the difference between buying primary and secondary market. A lot of people think, aha, I shall buy a rising contemporary star. He'll be the next Picasso and we'll make lots of money from our investment.
Mm-hmm.
Chances of that happening are exceedingly remote.
Yes.
What in fact is good as an investor is to buy something which has an established secondary market, which has a far better chance of being worth more money in the future than something which has no secondary market.
Now, there are some living artists that have a very healthy secondary market, like Hockney. But is it true to say that most of the strong artists on the secondary market are deceased and people are dealing with their estates rather than people dealing with making new work?
There is today the so-called rush to the modern. You have a situation where a Picasso is worth more than a Rembrandt.
Mm-hmm.
You have the situation where a Hockney is perhaps worth more than a Vermeer or something like this. Now, in terms of quality, frankly, you probably couldn't justify such an argument. But investment doesn't need justification. Investment needs hard cash.
Yes.
And that's the reality of the world, and that's the way we live today. The rush to the modern means that modern and contemporary becomes worth more than old, ancient, and quality.
Mm-hmm.
As a consequence of that, you're finding Damien Hirsts and Hockneys are possibly better investments than, say, Bracks or other artists of note who've been deceased a long time. Possibly not. A lot depend upon what happens. I'm always in mind of what happened to James Abbott McNeill Whistler.
Oh, yes.
In 1920, a highly significant and very important artist, in 1920 was the etching boom. It would cost you 1,000 gold pounds, little gold sovereigns, to buy a Whistler etching at that time. That was a gigantic sum of money. It was a prodigious sum of money. People were earning 15 shillings a week in those years. So then came the depression and crash of the 1920s. Everything zoomed down in value. And after the depression came the Second World War. And after the Second World War, if you wanted to buy a Whistler, cost you not much. The value, which had been so great, the demand, which had been so enormous, had evaporated. You don't know what's going to happen.
So investing in art is a long game, essentially, isn't it? That involves copious amounts of research about what has happened to the artist in the last few years. How far back do you think people need to look when they're starting to invest? The last 5 years, the last 10 years, for the whole of the artist's lifetime?
Very hard to know. Difficult question. I mean, there are contemporary artists today who've risen from almost nowhere to prodigious superstardom and whose prices are enormous. There are, I mean, for example, a very good example is Mr. Banksy. Now, everybody wants a Banksy, but you know, if you buy a Banksy lithograph today, it's going to cost you north of 20,000 quid for a sort of average one. It's made an edition of 500, it's on indifferent paper. It's really quite staggering and amazing that an artist like Banksy could command such a gigantic price. Is it sustainable? I don't know. Somehow I doubt it. Somehow I myself would buy, I wouldn't be buying Banksys for long-term investment, but I do know many people who have done so have done rather well. Who knows what the future holds?
And on that note, thank you very much for all of your wise and sage advice on investing wisely. If people are interested in learning more about investing in the secondary market, are you available for consultations?
Absolutely. www.fairheadfineart.com.
Thank you so much, Niall. It's been a pleasure to speak to you and pick that lovely brain of yours.
A pleasure to speak to you too. Have a good one.